Tommy, I actually went to the game Sunday night against Brooklyn. Just so impressed by their team. Jaylen took over early. Tatum closed it out late. Over the last 7 games, Jaylen Brown is averaging 30 a game, 7.6 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 54% from the field. Tatum's averaging 32 points a game, 10 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 49% from the field. I feel like those two guys, that duo, has just completely figured out how to play within that system, how to play together, when to take over. It's a beautiful thing to watch.
So my question for you, and we talk about this with Derek a little bit. We've talked about it a decent amount on the show already, but this team offensively is on a historic pace. Their offensive rating now is 120. The next highest in the league is Phoenix, which is 117. What is different about them this year from last year? Because it's pretty similar personnel. Why have they been able to turn what was a very good offense, obviously a team that made the NBA Finals, into a team that is on this like insane run right now?
It's a great question. I want to note one thing about their offense, and that is everyone, including myself, including you, including everyone at ESPN, all last year throughout the end of the regular season from January on when they made their turnaround, all throughout the playoffs, everyone talked about their defense. Their defense was awesome. It ended up being number 1 in the league, and from January on was just spectacular. It's important to note, they had 120 offensive rating in the regular season from January on. So these guys had sort of figured it out.
Yeah.
Here's where I see a difference between how they're playing right now and the playoffs. It comes down to their weaknesses in the playoffs, to me, were based on decision making. And right now they're making quicker decisions. I think the spacing has been a lot better. I think they do a great job of making that next pass. It's something that Steve Kerr talks all the time about with the Golden State Warriors. It's the ball movement breaks down a defense. It gets the defense into rotation. They obviously have guys that can break down the defense at the point of attack. But then those decision makings out of that breakdown have just been so good this year. They're number 1 or number 2. They've kind of been rotating with Golden State in terms of 3-point attempts, number 1 in the league to number 2 in the league. 3-point makes, number 1, number 2. They've been top 3 all season in percentage. They're just getting good shots out of that decision-making. And for me, that's the difference between right now and what we saw at times in the playoffs, where they at times went really ISO heavy, not a lot of ball movement, not a lot of player movement, and when driving into a crowd, didn't make great decisions. Right now, it's very unselfish. Actually, I have a great segue going back to the Warriors on this. There was an article, Marcus Thompson from The Athletic wrote this article about Steph and how playing with Steph has its own challenges. And Steph has this quote in there about, you just have to trust the chaos, that eventually the ball will come back to you and the right play will just happen if you trust the chaos. And watching them all the time on TV and getting to see them play on Sunday night, that's what they're doing.
So we've talked about, since they went on this run last year, we've talked about their flexibility on defense and their ability with guys like Al to basically switch 1 through 5 and Williams when he's playing. Do you think that's maybe not underrated at this point, because I think everyone realizes how good this offense is, but it's a similar thing for them offensively when you have these guys that can play multiple positions all the time and everyone can shoot, that basically everyone, no matter their size and no matter their sort of quote unquote position, is basically running the same thing all the time, which is not the case with basically the rest of the league.
Right. The lineup and the roster that they've put together and the patience that they've had. They think about the times over the last 5 years where they could have swung and used Jaylen Brown or used Marcus Smart and made a trade. Again, it goes back to just the roster all fitting together. It's a great point you make, Tommy. The roster fits together. These are highly skilled, athletic players that play hard night to night. You've got a great instigator in Marcus Smart. And to me, they are the favorites right now. They have looked like the best team in basketball. I love the Milwaukee Bucks as well. It'd be interesting to see. Chris Paul supposedly is going to be back in the lineup tonight for his first game back after a lengthy layoff with a heel injury. And most people probably agree with me on that, including DraftKings Sportsbook. And it's interesting. There's a bunch of futures on DraftKings right now. I'll go through them. NBA Finals champ. The Boston Celtics are the favorites. Eastern Conference, the Boston Celtics are the favorites. Most regular season wins, favorites. Jayson Tatum for MVP, favorite. Joe Mazzulla, who we haven't even mentioned, coach of the year. Right now, he's the favorite. Malcolm Brogdon, by the way, we didn't mention him. We've talked about him previously when we brought up the Celtics on a previous episode. He's been fantastic. He's third right now in odds. And personally, I think he could end up being the sixth man because they're going to have such a high win total, and his play has been so solid.
So all of these futures seem, like they make sense. They seem like pretty safe bets at this point. My one question for you, if there's any concern, I think is there has been a little bit of a drop off defensively. They're 15th in defensive rating right now. They were number 1 last year, and Missoula's talked about it a bunch. It's not like they're pretending like this isn't the case. Is there any concern for you there, or is that something you think is just going to get worked out as the season goes along and as Williams comes back?
I don't have a concern on that end. To me, when you have the roster they have, the familiarity with each other, and the point of reference, that's the point here. There's a point of reference for how good that group's defense can be. They know it. Rob Williams will certainly help. They are trending in the right direction. They've been primarily number 1 in offense the entire season. They were low to mid 20s for a large portion of the beginning of the early season. The fact that they're up to 15th shows that they are playing well and better on that end of the basketball. I talked about how they're able to break down the point of attack. They just don't have a lot of defenders. I don't know. That you can break down consistently at the point of attack. Even going against guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, they did double Kevin at times, especially on post-ups, but they have guys that can stay in front and contest. And so a lot of teams, even with 2 or 3 great defenders, will have those weak points. They just don't have it.
Can we shout out my boy real quick?
Aaron Gordon?
No. My boy Sam.
Hinkie?
I feel like you should love him. He is Hauser. He's a great story.
My next guest was Sam Koppelman.
Maybe we will have him on the show at some point. But that's a good example of somebody who didn't play last year. Wasn't in the conversation with this team last year, and was forced in part because of the Gallinari injury. It's actually interesting to think about, if he was healthy, where this offense would be even then, which is crazy to sort of even consider. But that's a good example of somebody who's been thrown into a role and just completely probably exceeded everybody's expectations besides maybe himself and some of the people on the player development.
He'd be an interesting guy to have on the podcast.
I think so too.
Maybe we can make that. We don't want to overdo the Celtics content.
And we have a couple other guys that we're going to have at some point who we have not had on, which are going to be exciting. But it's hard to find any real weaknesses with them right now.
Really like this team.